What's up, guys? This is Pat, and before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder to please hit that subscribe button and leave us a rating and review. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn at The Founder Hour. All right, here we go.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Posh.
I'm Pat.
And we are super excited today to be chatting with the first CEO and founder of Netflix, Marc Randolph, who is also now an author of the book That Will Never Work, which, by the way, is amazing, Marc. You know, I have it right here. Pat and I both read it. Fantastic book. And thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, thanks. A pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. One thing I do want to note, the book does a really great job of just kind of going through the whole story of the origin story of Netflix and sort of your experience as the CEO up until, you leaving. So I do want to encourage folks to read that book because it is a great supplement to our conversation today, which, we really wanted to take this time to dive into some of those pivotal moments and your mindset around some of those things. But just to kind of get a backstory, tell us a little bit about, your upbringing. I know you're born and raised in New York. What were you like as a kid? What kind of stuff were you into?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, when you're growing up, you don't even think about this stuff. And then only years later, do you look back and go, gosh, were there glimmers of who I am now, emerging back then? And certainly, I think so. I mean, for one is I've had this lifelong passion for the outdoors, whether it's, climbing or mountain biking or hiking or surfing or all that stuff. And that's certainly started very, very early. So it's important because, figuring out the kind of things that you love that really are your happy places is an important thing to figure out early, ideally. But, in terms of the entrepreneurship bug, I think that was there pretty early as well, that I was always someone who, when they saw a problem, kind of would immediately begin spinning on how do I solve it. I kept a little notebook of all my inventions where I noted down all kinds of little ideas I had that I thought might be cool and made little sketches of them. One time when I was digging through my dad's stuff, I found in there a patent he had been issued years before, that he had invented something and gotten a patent. And for some reason, I thought that was the coolest thing I could imagine. And I kind of vowed, and I must have been 7 or something, that one day I wanted to earn a patent. And then kind of amazingly, I mean, here, you can see the video one. You guys can't all see that because I'm on my audio, but right here, I'm pointing to it, is I was actually granted 3 patents years and years later.
Wow.
But they're kind of lame patents. They're business process patents rather than technical invention patents. But listen, I'll take what I can get. But anyway, but forever I was kind of that way. Even in high school and in college, I was always the guy who was starting a club, or I was launching a magazine, or doing a new publication, or putting on a show. I just was compulsively driven to see openings and want to drive trucks through them.
Marc, I've read your book. I've watched a few of the things that you've talked about. And in those stories, I see a lot of you just doing and doing and doing and doing. And I don't know whether or not you had a long-term vision. I think a lot of people at 21, 22, 23, and maybe even before they hit 30 probably don't. I know Pat and I are probably in that same boat a lot, where we're just trying a bunch of different things, seeing what sticks, right? But one thing that I think that was really interesting to me that has almost always been consistent for you was that you loved the outdoors, you loved those trips that you took, and that was a big teaching experience for you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about those trips and what that taught you early on, but also later when you became a founder and CEO?
Yeah, it's true. I mentioned, a moment ago that outdoors has always been a big part of my life. But it's not just outdoors. These aren't just strolls in the park. These are adventures, I guess you'd call them, which is that experience of going out and doing hard things. Climbing is a good one. Doing rock climbing or ice climbing or mountaineering, doing caving, just doing things where there's a chance, there's a possibility a visit to a hospital could ensue. And one of the things you get out of that is this realization that you can really be in the moment. That most of these activities, the thrill comes from when you're doing them, you are totally transfixed with what's happening at that instant. There's not a lot of what's going to happen in the future or what have I done in the past. And it turns out to be a really great balance to the entrepreneurship, which in fact is a tremendous amount of what might go wrong in the future and what did we do in the past. So that alone, finding that initial balance in life was a big accomplishment. But the other thing was that I was fortunate enough when I was young to get involved with this organization called the National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS. And they did, at the time, they do a lot more now, but at the time they did these month-long expeditionary courses into wilderness areas, mostly into the mountains. And it was a leadership school. And the way they taught leadership was by breaking the group into smaller groups of 5 or 6 people and appointing one person leader of the day. And they were the leader of the day. They made decisions about when we left, what route we took, when you stopped for a break, whether you stopped to fix someone's bad blister or whether you said, let's wait out until the break. All those questions you had to decide. You had to keep your group together. You had to communicate them. And at the end of the group, the back of the pack, you had the instructor who was there to kind of watch, make sure you didn't take the group off a cliff, but more importantly, to help at the end of the day deconstruct how you did. And I started doing that when I was 14. And I did it again at 15. And then I eventually began working for the school as an instructor when I was in college and a little bit thereafter, eventually being in charge of these entire month-long groups, full responsibility myself. But the point is, I was learning leadership by doing it, not by reading about it in a book, not by being taught it, not by doing case studies, but by actively being put in a position of real responsibility where the decisions I made had real consequences, and then finding out less than 8-10 hours later how I did. I mean, you saw the implications of what happened if you let the rest break go on for an hour and a half. You saw the implications if you took a wrong turn, if you chose a bad place to camp, if you left too late, if you didn't stop to eat, and if you didn't communicate clearly. And little by little, you gained more and more responsibility, and the decisions became more and more real, communicating with clarity about decisions I wasn't entirely sure about myself. And those are all the exact same things you do when you have to lead a startup.
You mentioned having this entrepreneurial bug early on, like around that age when you're in high school. And it can often turn into a dangerous thing when it comes time to choose a path, choose a career, quote unquote. Because oftentimes, you may try to start a business or just kind of be in a leadership position from the get-go, but it might not work out for many reasons. So was there anything like that you had your eyes set on that you would potentially go down like some sort of career or profession, or was like starting a business and being an entrepreneur the only way for you?
No, I was clueless. I mean, as I think most people, I had no idea what I wanted to do in my life. I didn't really get any of that real clarity until I was almost 30. And it's certainly advice I give to young people all the time, which is chill out. Like, you do not need to know your whole future path when you're 16 years old. I have some young friends of my kids who, back in 5th grade, they'd go, I want to be a veterinarian because I love cats. And you kind of roll your eyes, and God bless them. Two of them are veterinarians now. And I go, that's fantastic if you know what you want to do and it carries through. But for most of us, we have no idea. We're trying things out. We're experimenting. We're doing different experiences. And it's a long, circuitous path. And it was certainly no different for me. I was a geology major in college. But I had no intention of working as a geologist. I just thought it was cool. I did so much time in the mountains. It was interesting. And we got to do field trips. How could you not choose a major based on something as reasonable as that?
So one thing I'm still curious about is, you had that opportunity to do, that outdoor adventures and really learn leadership by doing it. A lot of people, and I talk about people that are in their mid 20s, even, mid 30s or whatever, who want to be entrepreneurs, who want to be leaders, but haven't had those types of experiences, whether it was because they never had the opportunity or at the moment they didn't know. But I still don't think it's too late, right? What do you think that those people can do now to actually do things and to be leaders, as opposed to just listening to our podcast or reading your book or consuming other sorts of entrepreneurial content? What are the tangible things people can really do on a daily basis that will set them on the right path to becoming entrepreneurs?
Well, listen, if you want to be an entrepreneur, for God's sake, just do it. Stop the belly aching about, I need to raise money, or I need to be graduate, or I need my MBA or my computer science. Bullshit. There's no reason you can't stop. Again, you learn leadership by doing it. You learn entrepreneurship by doing it. You can learn things in school which augment those experiences. You can learn accounting and you can learn some best practices, but fundamentally you have to do it. And the way to do that is to start early and to scale your aspirations to your abilities. So if you are in ninth grade, you cannot start a company that makes a next generation CAT scan machine. But there's no reason you can't set up the equivalent of a lemonade stand. There's no reason you can't have an online store that sells Beanie Babies. There's no reason you can't start a nonprofit which is designed to deliver food to neighbors. I mean, these are all things you can just do. And you'll begin just the same way I did when I was hiking and backpacking. You'll learn by making minor mistakes. You'll learn how hard it is to recruit someone to come work with you, but you'll eventually figure it out because you have to do it. You'll learn what happens when you're trying to sell something and people say, I'll pay you back later. You'll learn the ability of that there's things called spoilage and there's things called returns. And you'll do that not because you learned it in a class. You'll have experienced it at a scale and consequence that you can manage yourself. And in fact, the single biggest attribute these days for being a great entrepreneur is being clever enough to figure out how you can test and try and do your ideas without them turning into a big ordeal, so that you can do them with limited means and limited time and limited resources and limited experiences.
Talk to us a little bit about what you ended up doing after college, because I feel like whatever that was probably foundational to kind of the rest of your career. So tell us a little bit about those days.
So it's interesting, I there's a job that I had. I didn't even talk about very much, but for some weird, quirky thing, someone sent me out to Colorado to run kind of a resort that was in a ghost, that was made out of a ghost town, like that one. It literally was an old ghost town that had been built. It had the boom days in the 1890s, and it was now nothing but old cabins. But it had a saloon, it had a dance hall, it had a restaurant. That was my first job out of college, and it was like a little practice business. But wow, is that exciting and scary at the same time. And you learn things very viscerally. You learn cash flow. You learn marketing. You learn what you can say on the posters that you put up in the nearby town that get everyone to make the drive or not. You learn about what happens when you mix together, pardon me if I'm slightly politically incorrect, but this is based on observation. What happens if you mix together alcohol, pool tables, and women, and you get fights? So you learn that stuff. You learn when you need a bouncer. You learn how much beer to buy. This is not stuff that I still use, but boy, you learn it all the time. But anyway, the real beginning of my career after that weird experience for a year was I got this job at a music publishing company. And my job was basically to follow the CE around with a notebook everywhere. I sat in every meeting. I came with him to every sales call. And basically, if he said, Jim, get me those numbers by Wednesday, I would write down, make sure Jim gets him the numbers by Wednesday. And if he made a commitment, I'd then maybe the reminder, or he'd say things like, okay, I'll make sure I send you. And I go, oh shit, okay, and that means I've got to send that stuff. I think now it has a glorified title. I think you call that chief of staff, but it's basically like the gopher in a way. But anyway, this music publishing company was pretty diverse. It had a lot of divisions, and one of its divisions was mail order. And I'm creating a vision which is probably grander than it was, because the mail order division was exclusively one sentence printed in the back of every music songbook they sold that said, for a list of more great Cherry Lane songbooks, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to P.O. Box so-and-so. And for some bizarre reason, which even now, 40 years later, I can't understand, I found that fascinating. And so I said, I want that job. And then, because the person left, and he said, fine, you did a great job working for me, take that job. And so it started out that I would go to the Xerox machine and make a copy of the more great Cherry Lane songbooks, stick it in the self-addressed stamped envelope and drop it in the mail. And if an order came in, I'd go to the warehouse and pick, pack, and ship it. And I got so curious, and I said, what happens if I do it in color? What happens if I do a 2-page insert? What happens to catalogs? How about mailings? I taught myself about mailing lists, about fulfillment software. I learned direct marketing by doing it, and found that I love direct response stuff. And that was the moment. I mean, I wasn't quite 30. I was in my mid to late 20s. And I go, I want to do this forever. It was this blend of creativity and science.
Would you say that you could equate mail order to what eventually became, and we now all know as like the subscription business?
Well, what do you know? You go, because I did 2 jobs where I did 2 magazines, one of which where I was doing subscription circulation. And the second one, I was much more senior thinking about the magazine. But yes, so the things I spent 15 years on was, how do I measure everything? How do I do really deep analytics on things? How about personalization? Really critical when you're doing mail order. And subscriptions. So what a weird coincidence that 15 years later, I end up with a company which is doing e-commerce, which is basically direct response on steroids. It's selling things using deep, very, very computer-driven personalization and analytics. And then even a few years later, subscription.
I had another more personal question from what I remember in one of the interviews that I watched in the past, God knows, month maybe. After I read the book, I was just like obsessed with you in this weird way and wanted to just know more. But you had mentioned that you met your wife at that weird job that you had in Colorado, right?
Yes, correct.
And what did she think about all this stuff? I mean, it seemed like you were uncertain about your career. And, usually when a woman and man are in a relationship, you hope that one of them has some sort of, set certainty or like some sort of like income for the future, right? Until somebody else is building. What was that like between the two of you?
We often joke that it was fantastic that we met back then, that we met when not only did neither of us had anything. I mean, we were both broke. I had this, I had a bushy beard, kind of looks like the two of you guys, except I had a way more huge Jufro on the top. I mean, it was
lucky you. I'm running out of hair here.
Well, yeah, you can see what I look like. Yeah, it was scary, and somehow she saw through all that. Maybe this guy will make something of himself. And even in the few years after that, we were, as most young couples were, in debt. Struggling to pay student loans and all those things, and so came through some really tough times together. We had 2 things happen simultaneously. We had a house burn down, and we had me do a job transition. And people often say that either one of those things is what puts huge stresses on a relationship. And so I think we kind of stress tested this relationship way before Netflix came along, or any of the other startups, really. And so it's really been this amazing partnership because we knew each other when, and in particular, she can remind me and make sure that I don't forget that despite any success that Netflix has had or any subsequent things have had, that I'm still that same old dork who had the goofy hat. And, I'm really no fundamentally different than I was back then, which was a normal
I
person.
love that.
Um, One thing that I remember you talk about, and I love this part of the book is when you're talking about, I think you were applying to like a job, and they basically turned down everybody, and you had to do a little bit more to get the job. So when did that come along? Was that after all this? Was that after working at the music publishing company, or was it before?
No, that was in college. I was again, as you heard, I was a guy who had no idea what he wanted to be. But it occurred to me that I might enjoy being in advertising, because I really did enjoy that whole creative process with an eye towards selling things. And so, almost on a whim, I found out that one of the big New York agencies was coming to my campus to interview. And I said, "What the hell?" And I interviewed and got the call back. And it turns out, though, of course, they had gone to every single liberal arts school in America. So probably 600 people got the call back. And we all did a cattle call down in New York, did a half day. And they interviewed us and had us watch videos. And then I made the second cut, which was to come back again. And this time was a smaller group, probably 40 people. And we spent the full day there. And again, I made the cut, amazingly. And now there's only 4 of us. And this time we were mostly meeting with senior people and interviewing all of us extensively. And then they sent us back to wait to hear. And the next day they called me and told me that I had not gotten the job, which I was kind of crushed, because I'm kind of one of those guys who assumes I can do this. What do they have that I don't have? And so to not get the job was so disappointing. And it maybe took me a day or so. And then I go, this is ridiculous. What was I missing? What did I do wrong? So I figured I'd find out. And I decided to write every single person that I had met with, not just that last day, but the day before and the first day. And all basically the same letter saying, what could I do differently? What could I do to prepare myself for a job here if I wanted to apply again in 6 months or a year? And sent all these mails off. And then about 4 days later, I got the call and they said, come on back down to New York. And I spent a half an hour with one of the senior VPs and he offered me the job. And the interesting thing, as you mentioned, was of the 4 of us who were all these finalists, they hadn't offered the job to any of us. That this job, which was an account executive job, was in many ways a kind of turning a no into a yes type of job. And they just wanted to see which of the 4 of us wouldn't take no for an answer. And I think I must have been the only one who wasn't willing to take no for an answer. It's a superpower. It really is. It is something that I have taught all 3 of my kids, and they use it to amazing effect. And I mean, seriously, and I'll give you I give you this example now. So all my kids went to kind of these competitive liberal arts schools, and it's very hard to get the classes you want sometimes. And what they would do, and my son learned this and taught it to the other kids, and they all do it, is that the class is sold out. You can't get in. So you go anyway, and you sit in the back, and you ask and then at the end of the first class, or even beginning of the first class, the professor will go, "I'm sorry, this class is full. We've already taken from the wait list. We're not going to be letting anybody else in. So those of you who are just kind of waiting, hoping for a spot, I'm sorry." And 3/4 of the people who were there get up and leave. And he goes, "Sit." And you sit. And after class, you go up and go, "I know you have no space. I hope you let me just sit and audit just in case something comes up." And you come back the next day, and then you come back the next day, and then you get in. And it goes, what the professor is looking for is someone who genuinely really wants to be in that class. And if you demonstrate that, and he goes, from then on, my kids never worried about getting into the classes they wanted, because they knew that if they didn't get in the first try, they would always get in that way. And I could go on, I could fill up this entire podcast with stories of not taking no for an answer and how amazingly that is when you recognize that's the reality of how people are wired.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that Pat and I always discuss this. And as much as I love yeses, I love no's even more, because that's where the real chase starts, right? When a guest that we reach out to says no to us, I love it, right? The worst thing is if we get ignored. But I like a no, because I know that that person's there. They've already responded. Now it's time to turn that no into a yes, right? And you just want to see what makes them tick, what's going to get them to the yes, because there's always a yes, right? Not having enough time, not wanting to do it. Those are bullshit reasons, right? Whether it's in business, in life, relationships, I don't care. There's always a way to get to yes, as long as you work with the other party to make it happen. So I love that that's your philosophy. And, I'm sure that was very helpful when you were running Netflix as well.
Yeah, and whenever I kind of tell this story, it's definitely, rest in peace, my inbox, because then everyone is pounding on it. So listen, I got to tell one more story about the not taking no for an answer, because I think really if people take away only a few things, this is one of them. So my daughter kind of shares my outdoors bug even more than me, and so she wanted to become a instructor at Knowles, where I was an instructor, and they changed since I was a lad. Now the age is 21, and she's 18. And she's going, oh, it's really a bummer that I can't get a job there because they don't take anyone until they're 21. And I go, well, listen, you are so more qualified than most 21-year-olds. I mean, you have done 3 Knowles courses. You have your wilderness EMT. You actually were an intern at Knowles Patagonia for a semester. Why don't you try? And I had to recuse myself. I'm not involved. And so she tried, and it turned into, she was like the Jackie Robinson of instructors, because they had a problem, which is they needed women to be instructors, but it was hard when women began at 21 because they aged out more quickly than the men did. And so they wanted them to be younger. And so there's this huge debate over my daughter over whether or not they could accept someone. And as an experiment, they accepted her. And so she never would have had that happen if she hadn't asked. And it's happened over and over and over again. If she had taken the first, you got to be 21, wouldn't have happened. And she's going on to be an instructor there for many years.
So why don't we fast forward a little bit? I know you were working at a company that eventually got acquired by Pure Atria, which was run by Reed Hastings, who's your co-founder and current CEO. Tell us kind of how that early relationship with Reed developed. I want to get into your conversations on your morning commutes to work and all that stuff. But before we do, how did you two start connecting? And was it sort of immediate, or was it over a certain amount of years? How did that work?
It was over a certain amount of months. And I think it was lucky that way, that we got a chance to know each other in a different context. Because specifically, as you mentioned, Reed had founded and was running Pure Atria, a big software company. And he acquired a small, maybe 12-person startup that myself and 2 friends had started. It was a pretty technical company. So the other 11 of them went and worked in the basement as a business unit. And Reed took me and installed me as being the head of marketing for this big company. And so I had a chance to work directly with Reed, so professionally, for 6 to 7 months. And the second kind of silver lining was, it turns out that Reed and I both lived in the same town, lived in Santa Cruz, California. And we began carpooling to work together. So we had a chance to establish a personal relationship as well. And this was all before even Netflix was even an inkling in anyone's mind. And we did this for 6-7 months or so. And then kind of an interesting happened, which is this big company, Pure Atria, was acquired by an even bigger company. And then the final fortuitous thing is that Reed and I were going to get fired. Or fired is the wrong word, because it was basically a merger of 2 big companies, and they didn't need another head of marketing, and they didn't need another CEO. So both of us were being let go. But these being public companies, there was a 6-month period waiting for all the government clearances to come through. And so we had to come to work every day with realistically not a lot to do. And that's pretty much the time when I said, I'm going to start another company, because I had been in 5 startups up to this point. This would be number 6. And Reed, he didn't want to start another company. He was going to go become an educational philanthropist, but he didn't want to leave it all behind entirely. So we made this deal where he would be the angel investor. I would start and run the company, but we needed to come up with the idea together. And that's what led to that 6 months of commuting, where basically we brainstormed ideas persistently every day, back and forth, 45 minutes each way.
Mark, was there anything you were passionate about, or was it just you were passionate about starting a business? That's it.
I was passionate about starting a business. I did have some criteria. The internet was reasonably new at this point, and e-commerce even newer. Jeff Bezos had already started Amazon. In fact, I think it already IPO'd Amazon.
Yeah.
But it was only a bookstore at that point. But because I had 15 years of direct marketing experience, I immediately saw how powerful that the internet could be for selling items, that the amount of inventory you could do, the amount of how easy you could make the search function, the personalization. And so my criteria, it had to involve selling something on the internet. And if there was personalization, big plus. And so not surprisingly, most of the ideas that I was pitching Reed in the car were selling things on the internet with personalization. Like one of the ones was, and I talk in more detail about the book, was about a personalized shampoo that you would cut off a lock of your hair, you would mail it to us. We would have our team of ace hair scientists, whatever that meant, formulate a proprietary shampoo just for you, and you would subscribe to it.
By the way,
that angle, subscription angle in too. Yeah.
I still think that's an excellent idea because, and I wish you started it because I wouldn't have lost my hair like I did. But who knows? Maybe somebody will come up with a more personalized shampoo in the future. You can invest in that.
Yeah, if they require you to send in a lock of your hair, that's what's going to challenge me.
Yeah, you and I we're pretty much screwed on that end.
Yeah, this one might actually work better for us. Maybe, anyways. The other idea was a personalized custom blend of dog food, where we would formulate a dog food for your pet's breed, size, age, gender, activity level, climate, whatever. And then you'd subscribe to that. So that also internet selling, personalization, and subscription.
Right.
And another one was looking at categories other than books. And an obvious one was video, which was an $8 billion category. But that scared us because of Amazon, because we knew that eventually they were not going to be books. And so we then began thinking maybe video rental. Also an $8 billion category. And because of all my experience in the mail order business, I knew a tremendous amount about shipping, we had pioneered next day shipping when I was at Mac Warehouse and Micro Warehouse. And I knew how that worked with FedEx and with UPS. And so we said, maybe we can make that work. But that too was deeply flawed because at the time, video came on those VHS cassettes, which were, big and clunky.
Mark, when I was reading this book, like literally every page, I started to have anxiety for you. And I was like, God, please don't do that. No, oh my God. It's like, how is he going to deal with that? How is he going to deal with that? How is he going to deal with that? I mean, what the hell was it that just kept you going? I mean, like, every day, like even after you started the company, it just seemed like it was a disaster, And I don't mean that in a negative way, really, but it just seemed like there was no way to overcome it, even from the ideation point. It was like, well, that's impossible. Well, that's impossible. what in your mind was keeping you going?
Well, this really comes down to what was the motivation for being an entrepreneur. And you've never once heard me say that, oh, I was always wanted to be an entrepreneur because I wanted to be rich or I wanted to be famous back when I started, those weren't things that anyone knew or could talk about. And unfortunately now it has become this glorified thing where people get in it for the wrong reasons. But nevertheless, I've always been in it for the same reason, which is I love the puzzle. I love the problem solving. I love that coming to work and sitting around the table with the smart people, solving the most complex puzzles there are. And that's what keeps you going, is that you're pretty sure there's a solution and your job is to find it. And you're testing things and they're not working, but they give you these glimmers of the next thing to test, and that excites you. And that never goes away. I mean, yes, you go through dry periods. You certainly go through periods where you're discouraged or disillusioned, but you always have this belief that eventually, it's like it's like the New York Times crossword puzzle on Saturday. Like, I trust that there's probably a solution, but man, I'm not sure I can do it.
Yeah.
But if I work at it long enough, maybe I will. And it's like that, and it's still fun. It's the way it's why someone like me does it.
Right.
So when that idea for Netflix came to you, how far into it were you looking? Like, did you have this grand vision of disrupting home video and like just taking over the whole scene, or was it a little bit smaller than that?
No, it was considerably smaller than that. I mean, we picked a big category. We picked $8 billion category, not because we go, well, it's $8 billion or bust. We picked it because it leaves huge room for error. You can screw up. You can be minuscule. You can get a lot wrong. And still, if you get just a fraction of the market, it's probably enough to sustain you while you figure it out. And like early on, I still have this document someplace, at one of the pep talks for the company, I set this goal, which I thought was big and hairy and audacious, of being a top 10 video chain. Or even initially, we want to be as big as a single big Blockbuster store, which was $750,000 a year. It's about an average Blockbuster back then. But that was absurd. So you never envision, how are we ever going to get the rights to Orange is the New Black? Or, you're just purely thinking about the problem that's in front of you. And the problem in front of us was, how do we build an e-commerce site that even works? How do we get people to rent video? How do we get started?
And what did you do to get started? I mean, like, you obviously, there was a lot of stuff that needed to go on. I know that Christina and Tay were big parts of that process. And how did you even get people to join you? Like, I mean, you're at this point, how old were you? Like 39 or 40?
38.
38, yeah. And you've done a lot in your life. You've found a little bit of success selling companies. You know what you're doing, but how do you get somebody or some buddies to trust to come along on this wild journey of essentially trying to, beat Blockbuster and beat Amazon to the game? And I mean, it's a wild idea. I mean, chances are it won't work. How do you convince someone to be like, you know what, leave your safe job there and come along with me. We're going to go on this crazy ride, and we might fail, and we probably will. I mean, what does that look like?
There's two things to it. The first one is, you said I was 38, and I had done a bunch of this before, and I had accumulated a bunch of people who I knew had the temperament and ability to do this. I mean, I don't know if you ever seen the movie, must have seen the movie The Blues Brothers,
No.
Belushi and Aykroyd. Oh my God. Children, I tell you. What's the one with the Kyrie Irving, Uncle Buck is what it's called? Anyway, it's the classic buddy movie where they start out by going around and getting the band back together again. You're driving and trying to convince each person to come and do this one last game or play this one final gig.
What about
I had the same thing.
Gone in 60 Seconds is a good one. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yes, exactly. Another perfect one. That's right. They're all like, the guy going, no, I gave up that game 15 years ago. oh, come on, no one can crack safes the way you can crack safes, or whatever it is. Yeah, it was like that. And that's how you're recruiting your team. You're going around to the people you've worked with before, have it in them to do this type of stuff, and saying, leave your job, come and do this. This will be so cool. We'll have a great time doing it, and we can really change the world. But then part of it is you have to bring other people around to your way of thinking. And part of that is having, the most powerful force in the world is optimism and conviction. And it's not bullshit. It's real. You genuinely believe you're going to do something special, that you are going to take this apparently insurmountable problem and figure it out. And wouldn't it be fun to be part of the team that does that? And that's an amazingly powerful force for recruiting people to come join you on your somewhat irrational journey.
I want to talk about this concept of focus in startups because it's really important, is and sacrificing that short-term growth or that short-term gain for the long-term growth, which is essentially what was happening. Was you saw this long-term vision of rentals being much more profitable, but you had to essentially focus and cut off this short-term DVD selling business. So you start experimenting and it's not doing as well as initially as you thought it would. Did it seem like a failure to you? Like, was that tough to deal with, that that balance and really focusing on that long term?
Yeah. I think it's in fact probably the hardest business decision that people who are in mature businesses have to face every day, which is balancing your current business versus your future business, especially when they conflict. And that was what was happening to us at the beginning. Was we were doing two things simultaneously. We were trying to be a DVD rental company, and as a lark, had begun selling DVDs, only to find out that the sales, as you pointed out, was 99% of our business, and that rental sucked. That no one did it, and if they did it once, they didn't do it again. And what the revelation was that you couldn't do both of them at the same time well. That it was confusing to people to come out and say, we sell DVDs and we rent DVDs. The checkout process was complicated and cumbersome. Operations was tricky. Even reading our analytics, devising our tests, everything was being made harder by essentially being in two businesses simultaneously. And we came to that decision point that so many businesses come to, where you have to make the bet. And you either say, we're going to focus this business on the business is paying 99% of our salaries and paying 99% of the rent. And in fact, is paying everything, but doesn't have a future. Will slowly but surely diminish and eventually go away. Or we can bet everything on this unproven piece that shows no signs right now of working. But if we can get it to work, is greenfield and could be huge, could transform the way people do something. And boy, that is a terrifying decision to make once you realize those things are mutually exclusive. And most companies don't have the courage or the ability to make that call. They stick with their old business way too long. And because they do, they never put the focus and attention on the business they should. And we, to our credit, had the guts to do it, to walk away in one single day from selling DVDs so we could focus everything we had on renting. And there is nothing scarier than in a single day coming to work the next day and having your revenues be 1% of what they were the previous day.
And Mark, one of the things that maybe people don't know who haven't read the book yet, and again, they should definitely do that, is that along the time you finally came up with this idea for Netflix, Reed Hastings did invest in the company. If I'm not mistaken, it was 1.9 million. Originally, it was 2, I think, and then he took the 100,000 away. You said, and you had to go and call your mom and a few friends and family, and you finally made it happen. So I'm glad you did. What was Reed's involvement early on, and then also kind of touch upon the point that the Amazon meeting happened and what happened there to essentially have you guys change your mindset about where the business should be headed?
At the beginning, everything was as it was planned, which is that Reed did write the check for $1.9 million. We did go out and raise money from angel friends and family, my mom included. And Reed did go back to school. I gathered up the merry band, and we spent 6 months building the website, getting every DVD available, getting content, getting some deals with DVD manufacturers to put coupons in the boxes. And we launched, happy anniversary. We launched exactly a week ago, 22 years ago, April 14th, wow. 1998. And so Reed was still happily at school. We would talk once a week. He'd occasionally pop in after work or after school, check how things were going. And then about 3 months in, summer of 1998, we did get that call from Jeff Bezos asking if we were willing to come on up to Seattle to chat. And it was not a big secret, what that chat was going to be about, because as I mentioned before, they were just selling books, but it was no secret. He had made no secret that he wanted to be the everything store. And we were pretty sure next was going to be video and music. And so we go, okay, he probably wants to think about buying us. So Reed and I flew up to Seattle and went in to see the Amazon offices. And what was surprising is that we expected to find this gleaming temple, because this was the paragon of e-commerce, the golden boy, the visionary. And we were like wandering through these grimy, crime-infested areas of Seattle with, broken glass on the sidewalks and people shooting up in the doorways. We're going, this is where the paragon of e-commerce is headquartered. And in fact, going in the building, it was in an old warehouse, and there was desks crammed everywhere under the stairs, and pizza boxes piled up, and people 4 desks to an office. But we had the meeting with Jeff, and it was actually great because you could almost see that he was right on that cusp of starting to go, wow, this is becoming some real responsibility. He was losing a little bit of that founder new business excitement. And talking to us, you could almost see him reliving those days at the very beginning. Because both companies kind of shared this thing, which we didn't realize until we spoke, that when they had orders come in, every time an order came in, they would ring a bell. And we had set it up so whenever orders came in, we rang a bell. Jeff and I go, oh, that's pretty cool. Connected on that. We talked about the weird names we had before we both arrived, the final names for the companies were going to be. But anyhow, on the way out, the CFO walked us out, and she said, listen, this is interesting. And if it happens, just want to set some expectations. It'll probably be in the low 8 figures, meaning very low 8 figures. So we figured that probably means $14 to $16 million. And that wouldn't have been a bad outcome for someone who's been working on this for about a year. And I owned about a third of the company at that point. But at the other hand, Reed and I kind of felt like we had solved all the big problems. It was way too early. So in one way, this whole meeting was a validation, because this was the leader of e-commerce taking an idea that everyone else had told us that'll never work, and was saying he was interested in us. And his opinion counted more than 100 of other people's. But it was also this commitment ceremony for Reed and I, which is, do we have an out? Do we really want to do this, or do we not? And we decided we'd just gotten the engine to turn over, as I say, and didn't want to give somebody else the keys. And thus began the real plunge. And that ended up being a long, it took us another year and a half to finally come up with the repeatable, scalable business model. So it was a long a lot of times you look back and say, what the hell were we thinking?
So a couple years later, or that year and a half, 2 years later, I think it was when you ended up meeting with Blockbuster, right? You flew out, you chartered this $20,000 jet and had to fly out and meet him in person. And at this time, if I remember correctly, the business, like the financials were still not great. You were losing cash and burning through it, and you wanted to sell the company essentially, right? Is that what it was like? What was that conversation like? I know ultimately Blockbuster didn't end up taking the deal, which I think was for $50 million, which is one of the biggest mistakes I think in just history. So tell us how that felt. And I know coming from you, someone that doesn't like hearing no for an answer, what was going through your mind, and what did you do after that?
So what you have to realize is that we finally felt we had cracked the code. I mean, it had taken us a year and a half, but we finally had figured out a repeatable, scalable model, something that people would do and continue to do, and would pay us for, and pay us more than it cost to provide them that service. But it was a complicated model. It's the model that if you are still on the DVD service, you know today, which is that it was no due dates, no late fees, unlimited rentals, and a subscription. So it was so complicated that we, again, drawing on my direct marketing and magazine subscription background, had positioned as first month free. And then at the end of the first month, if you didn't cancel, you automatically rolled over and you began paying month to month, which of course now is like the model for every single SaaS company in the world. But I think we were one of the first people to apply it to the internet and software. But it worked really, really well, and it took off. But the downside of a first month free is that you accumulate all of your acquisition cost in month one. And because you're giving away the first month of service, it's a lot. And every month you get a little bit, and eventually you recover that acquisition cost, and then it goes positive. But what it means, ironically, is the more successful you are, the more cash it takes, because the more first month frees you have to fulfill. And then to add insult to injury, this was all accelerating in the summer of 2000, which was right when the dot-com bubble burst. And the willingness of VCs to back up a dump truck full of dollars and pour it into your driveway all of a sudden turned into them speeding past on the highway, pretending they couldn't see you. And we were screwed. And that was what led to this meeting with Blockbuster, which was this terrible feeling that we finally, now 2.5 years in, we're there. We figured it out. It's taking off. But we can't afford it, nor do we have access to outside capital to help us. And that was that the only alternative was Blockbuster. And you're right. We flew to Blockbuster. We pitched them to join the companies. That we would run the online, they'd run the stores, we'd find the synergy. And they said no. And flying home, it was a pretty dramatic moment, because I had hoped, it had taken us months to get this meeting. And when they finally said yes, similar to how you feel when you finally get a guest to agree to come on the podcast, you go, oh, problem solved. And I was sure this was it. It made so much sense. This was going to be the Deus ex machina, the hand of God that just plucks us out of our terrible situation. And instead, they had said no. And worse, they were going to compete with us. So there was no easy way out. There was no end run. There was no secret passageway. As my dad sometimes says, the only way out is through. And we were not only going to have to survive on our own, we have to survive on our own with them breathing down our backs. And that was probably the moment when Netflix had its back to the wall the most.
But were you like afraid that like it just they would totally come and crush you now that you were in this like predicament, or was it something that just fueled this fire in you that you're like, there's no way they're going to compete with us and win, like we're going to win out, and they don't even know it yet?
No, it's a combination of the two. You are, I guess, sobered is the best the best way to do it, is that the other face of this incredible optimism that I have, this sense that I'll figure this out one way or another, is occasionally you run into a brick wall. And that's what it felt like. I could see no visible means, that there was, the alternatives were to stop growing, which is kind of like death in a startup. The alternatives is what you lay everybody. I mean, I couldn't even envision how to get out. And so, yes, you're incredibly discouraged, but it doesn't take long for the wheels to begin humming again. Oh, here's some things we could try. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we can get money from here. And little by little, you begin to scrap and craft a plan. And in our case, it did require shifting our focus a little bit. But eventually we managed to find a way to get through that moment, and then really kind of, I mean, listen, you're never done. Whenever you crest one hill, there's an even bigger one behind it. But yeah, you put that one behind you, and then all of a sudden you face an even bigger threat from somebody else.
And Mark, one of the things that I truly envy about you, but I'm also admired by, is that you've just been punched so many times, right? I mean, like, one of the moments that really stands out to me, from your story, is that moment that Reed Hastings came into the office that night, asked to talk to you, and basically said, "You know what? You're not doing a very good job of leading this company. I'm going to step in and help you out." Right? Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, so I don't ruin the whole drama that you've written about. But you know,
You're going to make me relive this, go through my post-traumatic stress disorder.
how did that make you feel? Because I mean, just when I was reading it, I was like, I mean, I just felt so bad for you, but at the same time, I knew that you knew he was right, and I knew that you knew this was the best for the company. But how do you? I mean, how do you just allow that to happen? You've built this thing like it's your baby, and he wasn't there for the first year or so, and here he is telling you, "I'm going to do it better," or "We got to do it together."
It helps to understand Reed and my relationship, which is that one of the things that made us connect is that we're both extremely honest with each other. And with most, we're pretty blunt. We don't waste a lot of time on niceties. We don't shade the truth. We certainly don't avoid delivery of bad news to spare feelings. It's one of the things that I really loved about Reed the moment I began working with him, and I think he appreciated in me as well. We saw that in each other. So when Reed did poke his head into my office that evening and say, "We have to talk," and sat down and began delivering this message that in some ways he was kind of losing confidence in my leadership, I knew I had to take that very seriously, that this was not power play. This was not ulterior motive. This was him genuinely believing that our business might be in trouble if something didn't happen. And then more particularly, it was judgment. And he was worried that some of the decisions I was making were fine at the scale we were at, but he was concerned that as we got bigger and things moved more quickly, that the effect of even small miscalculations would be dramatically multiplied. That unless we had flawless execution, we wouldn't make it. And at first, as he was kind of delivering this kind of message to me, my head was spinning because I was wondering, is he going to fire me? And he had more stock than I did. He legitimately could have power played me out. But what I realized he was saying was something very different. What he was saying was that he should come in, join the company full time, and we should run the company together. Him as CEO and me as president. And that his argument was, regardless of what's happening now with you, it's hard to argue with the fact that having two of us doing this wouldn't give the company even a bigger chance of success. And he was right. You couldn't argue with that. But what made it particularly difficult for me was that it really required me to evaluate my own dreams, because in some ways, my dream was to be the CEO of a successful company, which is what everyone who kind of starts a company envisions. But what you realize is once you get a couple years in, it's not your dream anymore. It's shared. It's shared by every person you convince to come work with you. It's certainly shared with the VCs and and your mom who has given you money. It's even shared with the customers who you're now delivering something to, and you have an obligation to keep doing the best job you can. And so you realize you've got to separate this dream into two things. That is it the dream of me being the CEO, or is it the dream of having the successful company? And what do I do when those are potentially in conflict? And this is not the kind of decision you can, boom, oh, yeah, okay. It's hard. And after Reed left later that evening, I did sit by myself for a long time, as the lights kind of grew dark, and by myself in the office thinking through, what does this mean for the company? What does this mean for me? How do I explain this to my employees? What happens now? And is this really what's best for the company? And I went home and, and my wife and I sat outside in our deck and had a bottle of wine and talked it over. And, I knew it was not going to be easy, and I knew that I would have a hard time going forward with some of the aspects of it, but I knew that fundamentally this was the right thing to do. And looking back on the decision to have Reed come in as CEO and for me to move over and be the president and run the company together was in many ways probably the best decision I made in the entire time I was with the company. And for one reason, those next 2 or 3 years when we ran the company together were in many ways kind of the renaissance at Netflix. So many of the big innovations that happened that were so formative for Netflix happened in that period. And then certainly, gosh, looking at what's happened with Reed running the company since I've left in the last 15 years, most unbelievable leadership of almost any company in the world. So I'm pretty pleased with that call.
And we often hear, the stories of, or I guess the distinction between a founder, the person who starts a company and gets the ball rolling in those early days of just hustle and bustle, and then the more traditional sort of CEO type that comes in and is able to lead a large organization with thousands of people. And not to take anything away from Reed or you, and I'm sure that you have both sides, but was that the kind of case? Was it that you saw yourself, or in hindsight, see yourself as more of the founder, and then Reed was more like an operator, or was it different than that?
It's different than that, and there's two different things to talk about here. And I'll talk about myself first, but then remind me, because I do want to at least close it by talking about how Reed fits into this. But I was extremely lucky in my life because I figured something out pretty early. And I figured out what I love doing, and I figured out what I'm good at. And most people never figure out those two things. And for me, they were the same. They were early stage companies. I love that. I love the uncertainty. I love the paths where you can't tell what's around the corner. I love the discovery and exploration. I love building the teams. I love the whole culture building. And immodestly, I'm pretty good at it. I just have some of this weird talent of being able to recognize the one thing that if I got that right, all the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. And being able to focus on it when there's everything else is screaming for attention. I can inspire confidence in other people, all those things. But what was happening at Netflix, and happens in every company, is if you're successful, the nature of the job changes. And at Netflix, that happened. The problems changed. The type of talent we were able to bring in to address those problems changed. The resources we had, especially post-IPO, to deal with those problems changed. And you quickly realize that even though you love the company, the things you're doing, you don't necessarily enjoy that much. And more importantly, you're not really that good at it. that the things a company needs when they're small are very different than what it needs when it's bigger. And the role of a CEO when it's small is very different than the role of a CEO when it's bigger. And I'm totally comfortable saying I'm a really good early stage company guy. I'm a really bad late stage company guy. Do not hire me to run a 10,000 person company because I will screw it up royally and will have a miserable time. But I'm happy as a clam in a really early stage company. Reed is different. Reed is an exceptionally rare person, of which there's probably less than 10 in the universe, who are exceptionally gifted early stage entrepreneurs and exceptionally talented late stage entrepreneurs. And I put him in the same category as a Jeff Bezos, as a
Steve Jobs,
Bill
maybe.
Gates, as a Steve Jobs, maybe Elon Musk. But, there's not, as a Richard Branson, there just aren't that many people who can do it as companies scale. And Reed has demonstrated he can, which is he's a better early stage entrepreneur than me and immeasurably better late stage CEO than me.
And Mark, we have a bunch of questions from people that have been sending us questions that we would love to share with you if you have a few more minutes. Has it been bittersweet to see what has come of Netflix after you've left? And if so, how are your feelings about that and not being a part of it? And I know you mentioned you don't want to be a part of a big company or you just wouldn't do well. But looking back, how does this make you feel, all the success that Netflix has achieved?
Like, do I regret it? No. And the answer is zero. Zero is too strong. Maybe 2 parts per million, perhaps. So would it be fun to be sitting around that table solving some of the problems they're wrestling with now? Of course. God, wouldn't that be amazing? But on every single other axis, I have no regrets about having left. I am the luckiest guy you're ever going to meet. I got a chance to see the dream I had become real. I had a chance to build that up through the period of which I was really talented at doing that and got to see it live on. I've certainly continued to reap some of the financial success from the company. I've had a chance to watch it grow and mature. But more importantly, since I've left, I've gotten to spend my time doing the thing that I love and I'm good at, which is work with early stage companies. I've since gone on to really help found another company, which was phenomenally fun. I get a chance to mentor other early stage entrepreneurs. I'm helping them make their dreams come true or help them ideally have the type of success I've had. And I get to come into work every day, sit around the table with really smart people and solve really cool problems. And then I get to go home at night. I have time to pursue my passions, to do my mountaineering, to do my kayaking, to do my surfing, which I had not enough time to do when I was building and growing Netflix. I have a time to spend with my wife and my family. I have a great balance in my life. So on the whole, no, I'm remarkably lucky. No regrets whatsoever. Certainly has worked out tremendously well.
One question I had was when after the company went public, that IPO day, you kind of talk about your mindset at the time and that you never had to work another day in your life. Like you were set for life. Like you could do whatever you want. You didn't have to worry about money, but it wasn't about money for you. It was more about utility, usefulness. Can you elaborate on that? Like what was that? What did you mean by that?
Well, I was fortunate. I grew up in a reasonably affluent town. So my parents had a lot of very wealthy friends. And so early on, I just either dispelled of or never was inflicted with this disease that says that money equates to happiness. So I've never pursued money. I saw so many people who were so rich and so miserable. Marriages falling apart, kids wouldn't talk to them, self-hatred, and they were rich. And so quickly that dispels the fact that, boy, if I could only have money, I'd be happy, which is nice. And it is about the utility of what you're doing. the IPO is a kind of a different thing because that is kind of this carrot that's dangled out in front of every startup, and not without some merit to it. Because when a VC venture capitalist offers to give you $50 million, or in Netflix's case, $150 million, I think cumulatively by the time we were done, they are not doing that because, we'd love to see Marc pursue his dream, or, we think this is no, they have a very, very clear outcome, which is they want that $150 million back multiplied by 10, please. And the only way you can do that is with a liquidity event, a sale or an IPO. And your employees, the same thing. They've come and worked their butts off for you, partly for their salary, but a larger part for a chance to share in possible success in the form of stock options. And those only have value in a liquidity event. And so part of your role as a CEO or any founder is to hopefully bring a company to that point. So it's one of these things you're working toward, and then the day is there. And for me, it was a little bit of an anticlimax because, I'm sure you've all seen those images, the founders all huddled on the balcony at the stock exchange and the ticker tape, and they're ringing the bell and everyone's clapping and cheering. Well, that's the New York Stock Exchange. So wrong place, because we went public in NASDAQ. And in NASDAQ, that moment takes place in a windowless server room in Weehawken, New Jersey, or something like that. So instead, for the IPO, I was on the trading floor at Merrill Lynch, which is basically just an office with desks and guys on phones. And you wait around, waiting for them to find the price. And then finally, an hour and a half after the day starts, you see your ticker symbol scroll across with a price next to it. And everyone claps, and you pour some champagne, and then you go, all right, now what? And so for me, more of that moment was the afterwards. Like I had my son, who was 8 years old at the time, with me for the IPO. And I already knew where we were going after the IPO. And so we were in the taxi heading downtown. This is in New York, of course. And that was kind of when the out-of-body experience happened. Because I'm in this grimy cab. I'm not like in like a limo or something. And I'm watching all the people. It's New York. It's this huge tapestry of people. And you're going, God, every single person here has to work, but I don't. And how should I feel about that? But it wasn't flooding over me, this sense of relief, or because I go, I want to work. And I know that on Monday, I'm flying back to the office and I'll go back into work. And I'll probably not stop doing that. I like what I do. And the same token, I'm going, okay, I'm wealthy, I guess, but I'm not like on my way to get a big steak dinner or some irrationally expensive bottle of champagne or something like that. I'm on my way to take my 8-year-old Californian son to Famous Ray's to get a slice of New York pizza, which I grew up on and he's never had. And I think partway through that drive, I decided, no, I'm exactly in the right place. I'm totally fine going back to work. I'm totally fine. I'm going to get pizza. This is enough for me.
I love that. Another question that we have from one of our listeners is, what was your frame of mind when you started Netflix? And they asked because it's recession time now, so they're looking for some relevance as to how they should position their mindset when trying to come up with an idea and start a company.
Well, I'll have you do a little thought experiment. So when Netflix started, we were nothing. We rented DVDs by mail. Our competition, and the reason that everyone told me that'll never work, was Blockbuster. They have 60,000 employees. They have 9,000 stores. You could throw a stone and hit a Blockbuster. And I'm launching a DVD rental business. Now, how entirely irrational is that? What had happened if then what happens now happened then? All of a sudden, all the stores close. All of a sudden, you can't go out. All of a sudden, the only way to get entertainment, you can't even stream it. The only way is to get it mailed to you what would have happened to the business then? And the answer is probably would have been a remarkably positive outcome. And the answer is you never know what positive things can come from difficult circumstances. And I'm not sugarcoating the difficult circumstances. This is horrendous. But I'm saying there's always things that we can take away. Some people believe, and I must confess I'm one of them, that some of the strongest companies are founded in times of difficulty, not in times of affluence, because they're really required to think very carefully about what they do. Resources are more precious. Customers are more wary. You have to get it right. It's a little bit less forgiving for making your early mistakes, which means you're more careful about it. I think all things being equal, I wouldn't choose to do something in times of difficulty, but I wouldn't be afraid of it either. I think the bigger lesson, and I'm not sure what people take away from this, but that there's silver linings, and there's people who are obviously families torn apart, people losing their lives, people losing their jobs. But there's other things that are happening that I hope we can hold on to the good things that happen. I mean, I was traveling obsessively almost, probably 3 weeks out of 4 or 4 out of 5 with the book release and the speaking that I do and board meetings. And now I'm home and I've slept in my own bed for like 40 nights in a row, which is the most I've done in like 10 years. And I love it. And I'm saying to myself, you only live your life once. And how do you make sure you're spending your time on the things you really should be spending your time on? And this is kind of giving me a reset. And I hope that a lot of other people who can get through this okay can use it as a reset to think about the things that are important to them and get some things right.
What's something that since leaving Netflix that you've seen them do where you're like, let's go team, like I love that?
By far and away was Quickster. I don't know whether you remember the Quickster issue, but Netflix decided this is probably 6-7 years ago. God, I can't remember when. They decided to split off their DVD rental company into a separate company from their streaming company. And they really screwed it up. They did it very poorly about how they priced it and how they communicated it. And it was a debacle and the stock collapsed. But I saw exactly what was happening. This was the exact same focus that we did at the very beginning when we decided to walk away from selling DVDs to focus everything on rental. They were recognizing here were two things that were very, very complicated to do at the same time. That one was distracting from the other, that one was the past and one was the future. And they were splitting them apart. And I thought I was big shit for having the courage to do this when we had, $1 million, millions of customers, 100,000 customers. They were doing it when they had tens of millions of customers. And that's when I said, oh, bravo. That was courage at its finest. And it turns out they screwed up the implementation, but the tactic was exactly right.
So here we have on Instagram stories, we had asked a question right before the podcast about if somebody has questions for you. And some guy named Logan, I think you know him really well, asked 2 questions. The first one is a very simple answer. It said, which of your kids do you like most? And the second one, which I'll save you some troubles and you won't have to answer that one. But the second one is interesting. Would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 1,000 duck-sized horse?
Oh my God, I can't believe he's asked that question. And so I don't know if you recognize that question. It's a very famous Reddit question they ask in all the AMAs. And I did a Reddit AMA a few months ago, and I prepared for that. I had this long answer about what I would answer for which one I prefer to fight. And they didn't ask. Damn them. Reddit didn't. And now I ask it here, and I don't remember what my brilliant answer was. So I don't know. I think the answer is I'd probably rather fight the horse-sized ducks than the duck-sized horse.
Interesting. Why? I wonder, but why? Why a battle against 1,000 and a battle against one? I mean, you have experience fighting Blockbuster, right? Which was one company, and now you're going against
Yeah.
thousands of people. I mean, what's the mentality behind that?
Maybe that's it. I was able to take down the horse-sized duck, but the idea of having 1,000 little duck-sized horses coming at you, oh my God, that's just terrifying. That reminds me of like Night of the Living Dead. You kick 20 of them away, and then another 60 take their place.
I love a good
Thanks, Logan. Appreciate it.
Okay, so I know you always say your favorite movie is Pulp Fiction, but it's actually not. So, and then you do mention in the book what your favorite movie is, but has it changed? I think you said it was Doc Hollywood.
No, it is. I'm still really fond of that of Doc Hollywood. Asking me a favorite movie is very similar to asking which of my children is my favorite, because of course you like them all for different reasons. But Doc Hollywood speaks to me, and I think that that's the ultimate goal of a movie, is it should make you emotionally resonate and feel and think. And Doc Hollywood's a corny, dumb movie, but it makes me yearn for a simpler time, which I think is kind of an interesting lesson for actually right now, when we're all kind of being forced to live in some ways a simpler time.
The fact that you've been obviously helping a lot of young entrepreneurs and have been able to pursue your passion and all that stuff is amazing. Where do you see there being opportunity in this new decade, right? I mean, who would have thought that we would have started this decade with, coronavirus and this global pandemic? But letting go of that for a second, although it's hard, what do you see as this next 10 years looking like? And a lot can happen in 10 years, obviously, but where should people start focusing their attention to? What should people start studying more, and what should they learn more as opposed to study, I assume?
I think it hasn't changed. I mean, I think there's huge opportunity. I still think we're still in the early years of technical innovation. I mean, even the internet is brand new in some ways. Right now, the only real ways you access it is on your phone or on your computer or maybe your watch. But it's a little bit in your car. But we're just seeing the beginning of that rolling out. Huge advances, obviously, in AI and robotics. But I don't really care about all that stuff. I'm not a technologist. Well, what excites me is that it's getting easier and easier for people to take their ideas and make them real. I tell in the book, I tell a story about the 6 months it took to build a simple e-commerce website. At the time, from the idea to the validation, was 6 months and $1 million. What's happening now is because there's so much technology available in the cloud, on your watch, on your phone, that you can try things in minutes for no money at all. The time from idea to validation is measured in minutes or hours rather than in months. And that just means that the limits on what we dream up and may be able to try out is really, really slipping. And that, I think, is encouraging. That means pretty much anybody who has an idea can figure out pretty quickly whether it's a good one or a bad one. I think the next 10 years are going to be really exciting.
And I guess a little bit about the book. I mean, how hard was it to transition from being this founder of what became a major company to an author of your story?
Well, I've been writing my whole life. I mean, I was a direct marketing guy, and you spend so much of your time writing, and you're doing in direct marketing writing, especially, you're doing something what I call remote empathy, which is you have to imagine how your words are going to be perceived by someone on the other end, how it's going to make them feel, what it might make them want to do. Will it anger them, sadden them? And so I've been practicing persuasive writing for 40 years. What was new for me about writing the book was there is a structure and framework and science to book writing, which I found fascinating. I'm a nerd about everything I get into. I want to learn about make coffee. I go deep. And the same thing with the book. I really wanted to understand the process. So for me, it was both the art and the science. But the best part about it was really just reliving the stories. I wrote this book. The events I tell about in the book, I'm writing about 16 years after they happened. And that lets you put them in perspective to really recognize, where were we lucky? Where were we smart? Where did we screw up? How close did we come to dying? You can talk to the people, the Blockbuster people, and see where they were, what they were thinking. You can talk to the other employees, their impressions of the time. It's a really fun process of getting in your head a new view of something that you actually lived through and thought you knew well. And the exciting thing about the book is getting to share that with people and, see their reactions. As you guys know, I reveal my email address on page 96, I think it is. And it's been fantastic having people all write me with their in-the-minute impressions of how they felt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Page 96 for sure. You were dead on. I'm good. I mean, I can ask you so much more, but I know you're a busy guy that has a lot to do and a lot of book promotions to do, and to really get this going. And I'm very glad that you actually did write this book, because I know Pat feels the same way, and a lot of our friends who read this book. It gives you hope that really the impossible is possible.
It's literally called That Will Never Work, which is something that you heard often throughout your journey. So for those who are not hearing the most positive, feedback for their business, it's not the biggest deal. If you have this firm belief that it's going to work and it's going to work, then and having that conviction, I think it's a great book for anyone who's
for sure
interested in starting a business or has started a business.
Well, thanks. And if people want to rush out and buy it, I would be delighted. And of course, I will do my own personal self-promotional shout out. And if you want to read stuff that I've written in a considerably shorter form, you can come to the website, which is marcrandolph.com. Or if an even shorter form, you can find my semi-coherent ramblings on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Yeah, and we'll link it in the description. Marc, thank you so much. We wish you all the best, especially during this period. Stay healthy, stay safe, and hopefully we can meet in person someday.
We'll come up to Santa Cruz.
Thank you very much for the time. Yes, absolutely. You're welcome. Anytime.
Love it. Right, Marc. Take it easy. Have a good one.
All right, thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thank you.